I wasn't looking for anything special when I moved into the house on Maple Drive. It was a small, pale blue 2-story in a quiet suburb just outside Denver. The kind of place where every lawn looked freshly cut, and neighbors waved from their driveways, but didn't actually talk. I'd been through a breakup, I was tired of city noise, and I just wanted somewhere cheap and quiet to start over. The house was built in the early 60s, not old enough to be historic, but old enough to have stories. I got it for a price that felt too good to be true. The previous owner, according to my real estate agent, had moved out suddenly after her husband passed away. She just wanted to get rid of it quickly, the agent had said, shrugging. That phrase would stick with me for months, just wanting to get rid of it. I moved in on a chilly Saturday evening in November. The air smelled like pine and cold metal. The first thing I noticed was how quiet the house felt. No road noise, no distant dogs, not even crickets. Just a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. I unpacked a few boxes, opened a beer, and sat on the floor of my unfurnished living room. The hardwood creaked when I shifted my weight. Somewhere upstairs, something creaked back. I told myself it was the house settling. Around 2 a.m., I woke up on the couch to the sound of footsteps above me. Slow, dragging footsteps like someone walking barefoot down the hallway. I froze, listening. They moved from one end of the ceiling to the other, then stopped directly above me. I held my breath. Nothing. Finally, I grabbed the flashlight on my phone and climbed the stairs. The hallway was empty. The doors still closed just as I'd left them. The sound didn't return that night. A week later, I was cleaning the upstairs bedroom, the one I planned to turn into an office, when I found something strange wedged behind the radiator. A small picture frame face down and dusty. The photo inside showed a couple standing in front of my house. Probably in the 1970s, judging by their clothes. The woman had her arm around the man's waist. They both looked happy until I noticed the smudge on the right side of the frame. Not a scratch. A dark, oily handprint. A child's hand. I tried to wipe it off, but the stain was under the glass, pressed against the inside of the frame. I don't know why, but it unsettled me enough that I put the photo in a drawer and forgot about it. Or tried to. That night, the footsteps came back. This time, slower, closer. After 2 weeks, I'd gotten used to the small noises, the clicking pipes, the settling walls, even the occasional shuffle above me. I told myself every old house has sounds, but one night around 3 a.m., while lying in bed, I heard something that wasn't just noise. A voice. It came faintly through the air vent near the floor. A whisper, low and strained, as if someone was trying to talk through the duct. At first I thought I was dreaming, until I sat up and heard it again. 3 words, distinct, wet with breath.
"He's in here."
I jumped out of bed and yanked open the vent cover. Nothing but darkness and dust. My heart pounded so hard it felt like the whole house was shaking. I left every light on that night and sat in the kitchen until sunrise. The next morning, I saw my next-door neighbor for the first time, an elderly man in overalls watering his patchy lawn. I walked over, desperate to talk to a real person. He looked startled when I mentioned where I lived. "You bought that house?" he asked. I nodded. He looked down, shaking his head. "You should have checked the records. That place has got bad bones." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "The man who lived there before you, the one before the lady who sold it, he killed himself upstairs. His boy found him." I felt something drop inside my stomach. He went on. "The kid used to say he heard his dad walking around after, talking through the vents, asking for help. That same week, I started noticing something wrong with the bathroom sink. Every morning when I turned the tap, black water came out for a few seconds before clearing. At first I thought it was rust or sediment in the pipes, normal for old plumbing. But one morning, I let it run into a clear glass. It wasn't rust. The water had a reddish tint, thick at the bottom, almost like diluted blood. I threw the glass into the trash. That night I dreamed of the man from the photo, his smile stretched too wide, his eyes glazed. In the dream, he whispered something I couldn't understand. When I woke up, there were wet footprints leading from the bathroom to my bed. By mid-December, I'd stopped sleeping properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of someone standing near the bed. Not moving, just watching. Then came the smell, at first faint like damp earth or old copper coins. Then stronger, a sweet metallic stench that filled the upstairs hallway. I tore the carpet up, checked the crawl space, even called a plumber to check for a dead animal in the pipes. Nothing. The smell was strongest in the office, the same room where I'd found the photograph. That night, I decided I'd had enough. I went in, grabbed the drawer with the photo, and tossed it into a box for the trash. But before I left the room, I heard a soft sound behind me, like a sigh. "Don't leave me here." The whisper was so close I felt it in my ear. I turned, shining my phone's light, but the room was empty. The only thing out of place was the radiator. It was shaking slightly, even though the heat was off. A few days later, I came home from work to find the basement door open. I never opened that door. It led to a dark, unfinished space that always felt colder than the rest of the house. The door creaked softly as I approached. The air that drifted out smelled like metal and mold. Something in me said, "Don't go down there," but I couldn't ignore it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and descended the wooden steps. The beam cut through dust and cobwebs. Old furniture, boxes, and a single workbench sat against the wall. That's when I saw the markings. Scratched into the concrete floor beneath the workbench, a circle surrounded by handprints. Small handprints, and in the center, a name carved deep enough to crack the surface. Daniel. The same name written on the back of the photograph. I threw out the photograph the next morning. I even tried sleeping downstairs on the couch, but it didn't matter. The footsteps came again that night, louder, faster, like running. And then, the whisper through the vent changed. It no longer said he's in here. It said, he's back. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of my fire alarm blaring. The photo I'd thrown out, or one identical to it, was lying on my kitchen counter. The edges were charred, but the faces inside were untouched. Except now, there was a third figure standing behind the couple. A boy, barefoot, covered in soot. The last night I spent in that house still feels like a fever dream. The air vents hummed with whispers. The walls pulsed with dull, rhythmic thuds, like a heartbeat buried in the drywall. I locked myself in my bedroom, phone in hand, waiting for morning. Around 3:07 a.m., my bedroom light flickered once, twice, then went out. And in the dim light from the window, I saw him, a boy, standing in the corner, bare feet black with dirt, eyes hollow, head tilted slightly. He lifted one hand, the same handprint I'd seen on the photograph, and pointed at me. Then, behind him, the shape of a man began to form, taller, shadowed, and when it spoke, its voice rattled through every vent in the house. "You found us." I remember screaming. The next thing I knew, I was outside on the front lawn, barefoot, shaking, as dawn broke over Maple Drive. I never went back inside. 2 weeks later, I met with the city records clerk to finalize the house transfer. When I mentioned the name Daniel, she frowned and typed something into her computer. She turned the monitor toward me. In 1989, a man named Daniel Morris had bought the same house. 2 years later, both he and his 8-year-old son were found dead in the basement. Gas leak, the report said. But neighbors claimed they'd heard screaming before the explosion. The house was rebuilt, sold, again and again. I asked where the surviving wife had gone. The clerk hesitated. "She's still listed at that address," she said quietly. "Mail still goes there sometimes." When I first moved into the apartment on Pinehurst Avenue, I thought I'd found peace. It wasn't fancy, just a small one-bedroom on the top floor of a 1970s walk-up building. The rent was cheap, the neighborhood quiet, and the landlord seemed eager to have someone take it. He even offered me the first month half off if I signed the lease immediately. In hindsight, I should have wondered why. The first week was fine. The walls were thin, but the neighbors were polite. I worked night shifts at a hospital, so I slept most mornings and stayed up late. Around the fifth night, I started hearing noises from the apartment above me, dragging sounds, like furniture being moved across the floor. At first I ignored it. Old buildings creak, right? But the sound wasn't random. It came in patterns. A scrape, a pause, then 3 slow knocks every few minutes. At 2 a.m. I finally texted my landlord, asking if someone had moved in upstairs. He replied right away, "Nobody's rented that unit in months. It's empty." Over the next few days, the noise got worse. Sometimes I'd hear faint footsteps pacing above me, moving from one end of the ceiling to the other. Other times it was the sound of something rolling, heavy, metallic like a pipe dragging on concrete. I tried to brush it off. Maybe an animal got into the vents, I told myself, or maybe sound was traveling from another apartment. Then, one night, while lying in bed, I heard a distinct sound that made every thought stop in my head. A chair scraping against the floor directly above me, followed by the creak of someone sitting down. And then, a voice, low, male, humming. Not singing, not speaking, just humming. I couldn't make out a tune, but it carried through the ceiling, rhythmic and calm, as if the person above was completely at peace. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I went upstairs to the supposedly vacant apartment. The door was sealed with a property management sticker, the kind they used to mark a unit as unoccupied. The sticker was unbroken. Still, I knocked. No answer. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. When I turned to leave, I noticed something, a faint smear of something dark near the bottom of the door frame. It looked like old rust or dried blood. I snapped a photo on my phone and sent it to the landlord, asking again if anyone had access. He didn't reply for 2 days. On the third night, a smell woke me up. It was coming from the vent above my bed, metallic, sour, unmistakably organic, like meat left out in the sun. I got up and dragged a chair under the vent. When I opened it, the smell hit me like a wall. It wasn't just strong, it was wet. I could almost taste it. I stuck my phone flashlight inside the vent, expecting to see a dead rat or something, but instead, I saw something that didn't make sense. A small piece of fabric, checkered cloth, red and white, like the corner of a shirt sleeve, and beneath it, pressed against the metal slats, something pale, skin. I stumbled back so fast I nearly fell off the chair. The next morning, I called the landlord repeatedly until he picked up. When I described what I saw, his tone changed instantly. He told me not to touch anything and said he'd come by in the afternoon with maintenance. They showed up around 4 p.m. to 2 men who looked more like movers than contractors. They went upstairs, unlocked the unit, and stayed inside for almost 2 hours. When they left, they didn't say a word. The landlord only said, "There was nothing up there, just old insulation and some debris. I'll have the vent cleaned next week." But that night, the humming came back. Only this time it was louder, and it wasn't above me anymore. It was coming from the vent itself. I decided to record it. I set up my phone on the nightstand, facing the ceiling, and left it running while I pretended to sleep. When I checked the footage the next morning, my stomach dropped. Around 3:14 a.m., the humming started, faint, then growing louder. Then the vent cover began to tremble slightly. as if something was pushing from inside, and just before the clip ended, I saw a hand press through the slats. Thin, pale, covered in dust. It gripped the vent edge for a second, then disappeared back inside. I showed the video to a friend who worked in the same hospital. He told me to call the police. 2 officers came by that evening. They checked my unit, then the one upstairs. One of them came back down after 10 minutes, pale and sweating. "There's a room up there," he said quietly. "A room inside the ceiling." They called in detectives and forensics. Turns out, behind a false wall in the attic crawl space, there was a small hidden chamber, barely big enough for one person to sit in. Inside were old clothes, a blanket, empty cans of food, and bones. Human bones. The me later confirmed they belonged to a man in his late 30s, who'd been dead for over a decade. No official ID was released. The police sealed the building that night. I moved out 2 days later. Months passed. I found a new apartment across town, sometimes late at night. I had convinced myself it had all been a misunderstanding, that maybe the noises and smells had made me imagine worse than what was real. Then, one day, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo printed from a phone. It showed the ceiling vent above my old bed, and written across it in thick black marker were 3 words: "He's still there." I never believed in ghosts. I work as a home appraiser, and I've spent years walking through empty properties, from brand new builds to rotting houses with black mold on the ceilings. If something creaked, I blamed air pressure. If a door slammed, it was the wind. There's always a reason. At least that's what I told myself until I appraised the Daniels property in March of last year. The Daniels house was a 2-story Victorian in rural Pennsylvania, about 40 minutes outside Pittsburgh. It had been on the market for years, abandoned, partially renovated, half-finished wiring, the usual. I was there to do a final inspection before a bank auction. The place was empty, power barely working, but structurally sound. Still, from the moment I stepped inside, something felt wrong. The air was too still. No dust, no smell of wood or paint, just stillness, like the air inside a sealed tomb. I did my usual rounds, taking photos and notes. The downstairs was typical, cracked wallpaper, warped floorboards, peeling paint. But when I went upstairs, I noticed something strange. There were no mirrors anywhere. Every bathroom, every wall that had once held one, bare. Except for one. It was in the hallway, an old full-length stand-in mirror with a dark oak frame. Someone had covered it halfway with a sheet, leaving the top half exposed. At first I thought it was just old furniture, but when I moved the sheet, my reflection looked off. Not distorted, not delayed, just slightly out of sync. Like I blinked a fraction of a second before my reflection did. I laughed it off. Maybe I was just tired. Still, I made a note to tell the new owners to remove it. Old mirrors can be worth money. And this one didn't belong in the middle of a hallway. When I turned to leave, I heard a faint click behind me like someone tapping on glass. The mirror had shifted slightly, even though I hadn't touched it. Back at the office, I uploaded my inspection photos. That's when I saw something that made my stomach twist. In one of the shots, the one facing the hallway mirror, there were 2 figures visible, me in the foreground, and someone else standing just behind my reflection. A woman, her face pale, her hair hanging over one eye, her hand pressed flat against the mirror's surface. But in the actual photo I'd taken right after, nothing, just me. I checked the metadata thinking it might be a glitch. Same timestamp, same angle. No reason for it. I didn't sleep that night. The next day the realtor called, saying the house's power was still fluctuating. and asked if I could drop by to confirm the meter readings. Against my better judgment, I agreed. It was raining when I arrived. The house looked darker than before, like it had swallowed the light around it. Inside, I kept my eyes on the floor. I didn't want to look at the mirror again. I went to the basement, wrote down the numbers, and started back upstairs. Halfway up the staircase, I heard it. Knock, knock. It came from the hallway, from the mirror. Slow, precise. 2 knocks. I stopped breathing. Then came a third one, in a faint voice.
You left me here.
I ran out without shutting the door behind me. Over the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about that voice. I started digging through property records, looking for anything connected to the Daniels family. Turns out the last recorded residents were a couple, William and Ellen Daniels. William died of a stroke in 1989. Ellen disappeared in 1990. No missing persons case, no death certificate. Just gone. A local archivist told me Ellen had been a collector of antiques, mirrors. Specifically, when the police searched the house after she vanished, they found 7 mirrors covered with sheets. All but one were removed for evidence. The remaining one? The same full-length mirror I'd seen. 2 nights later, I was working late at my apartment when I noticed something strange on my desk. A small shard of glass. I didn't remember breaking anything. When I leaned closer, I saw that the shard was reflective, almost like a sliver of that same mirror. I picked it up carefully, and for a split second, I saw something move inside it. Not my face, someone else's. A woman's eyes staring back at me. I threw it into the trash and backed away. An hour later, my bathroom light flickered. When I went to check, I saw fog on the mirror, even though the shower hadn't been used. Words written across it, faint but visible. Don't turn away. A week later, I got a call from a renovation team working on the Daniels property. They said one of their crew members had quit on the spot after something weird happened. When I asked what, the foreman told me. The mirror fell over by itself, shattered, but the reflection didn't. I drove out there that night against every rational thought in my head. The mirror's frame was still in the hallway, glass scattered across the floor, except the center of the mirror was still intact, a clean oval of unbroken glass surrounded by shards. And in that oval I could see her, the same woman from the photo, standing behind me. I don't remember blacking out, but I woke up outside, on the porch with rain on my face. My phone said it was 3:19 a.m. The door behind me was wide open, wind howling through the hall. I looked back once and saw a faint glow inside the house. The mirror was upright again, only this time it wasn't reflecting the hallway. It was reflecting my apartment. The exact same layout, the same furniture, the same desk. Except in that reflection, someone was sitting in my chair. A woman, her head slowly turning toward me. I moved 2 states away a month later. I don't take appraisal work anymore. I don't keep mirrors in my house. But sometimes when I pass a store window or glance at my phone camera, I catch something behind me for just a second, a flicker of movement that doesn't belong. Last week I woke up to find my phone recording on its own. The video showed me sleeping and a faint handprint forming on the black screen beside my reflection. I don't know how that mirror found me again. Maybe it never left. A few months later, a local paper ran a story. Historic home on Daniels estate destroyed in electrical fire, 1 casualty. They said a squatter had broken in. They never found the body. But in one of the crime scene photos, taken by a neighbor before firefighters arrived, you can see it right there in the smoke-blackened window. A pale face, watching. And behind it, the faint outline of a mirror. You've already stepped too far into the dark. Subscribe, and let the shadows whisper their next truth directly into your ear.